1918, WWII, France. German officers gathered around a captured American pistol, passing it between themselves with smirks and laughter, calling it a crude cowboy's hammer compared to their precision-engineered Lugers. But when the brutal close-quarters fighting began in those blood-soaked trenches, German soldiers hit twice by 9mm rounds kept charging, while a single .45 slug from that crude Colt dropped them instantly, stone dead before they hit the ground. What did the Americans understand about stopping power that the Germans, with all their engineering superiority, completely missed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The spring of 1918 brought no relief to the men fighting in France. The Great War had been grinding on for nearly 4 years, turning the fields and forests of Europe into a landscape of death. Trenches stretched for hundreds of miles, filled with mud and blood and the bodies of young men who would never go home. Machine guns swept across open ground in deadly arcs. Artillery shells screamed through the air day and night, exploding with enough force to erase entire squads from existence. Poison gas drifted like yellow fog, burning lungs and eyes, turning breathing into agony. This was industrial war, where nations threw their young men into meat grinders and measured progress in yards gained at the cost of thousands of lives. The German army held strong positions in the WWII sector. They had spent months fortifying these trenches, building concrete bunkers and machine gun nests that could withstand almost any assault. German soldiers were well-trained, disciplined, and confident. They had defeated the Russians on the Eastern Front. They had pushed deep into France. Their equipment was the finest in the world, built with German precision and engineering excellence. Every rifle, every artillery piece, every tool of war represented the peak of military technology. The German people believed in their army's superiority. It was woven into their national identity, their sense of who they were as a people. Prussian military tradition stretched back centuries. These men were warriors, and they knew it. Captain Ernst Weber embodied everything the German officer corps represented. At 32 years old, he had already survived some of the worst battles. He had stood in the hell of Verdun, where hundreds of thousands died for a few miles of scorched earth. He had watched men drown in mud, burn from flamethrowers, and choke on gas. Yet he remained steady, methodical, tactical. He had studied at Berlin's finest schools before the war. He understood military theory, tactics, supply lines. He looked at war as a problem to be solved with intelligence and superior equipment. His men respected him because he kept them alive through careful planning and German discipline. On this particular morning in late May, Weber stood in his trench examining a collection of captured American equipment. His men had taken it from a forward patrol 2 days earlier. They laid the items out on a wooden ammunition crate like strange museum pieces. There were Springfield rifles, solid but unremarkable. Steel helmets shaped like shallow bowls, different from the distinctive German Stahlhelm. Wool uniforms that looked uncomfortable in the spring heat. And there, resting on a canvas pack, was an American pistol. Weber picked it up, feeling its weight in his hand. It was heavy, much heavier than his Luger. The metal was dark and plain. The grip was checkered wood, simple and rough. There was nothing elegant about it, nothing refined. It looked like something a blacksmith might forge, all thick metal and blunt angles. His Luger, by contrast, was a work of art. Its toggle action moved with precision. Its lines were sleek and purposeful. It had been designed by some of Germany's finest engineers. This American pistol looked like a club with a trigger. His sergeant, a thick-shouldered man from Bavaria named Klaus, leaned over to look. He laughed, a deep rumbling sound. "What is this thing, sir? It looks like a hammer." Other soldiers gathered around, curious. They passed the pistol between them, each man weighing it, examining it with growing amusement. One corporal pointed at the bore, the opening at the end of the barrel. "Look at the size of this hole! What are they shooting, cannonballs? Weber checked the markings stamped into the slide. It is called a Colt, model 1911, 45 caliber. He did the conversion in his head. That is 11 millimeters, much larger than our 9 millimeter. Klaus shook his head in disbelief. Why would anyone need such a large bullet in a pistol? Are they hunting bears? This is for killing men, not elephants. Another soldier chimed in, a young private who had been a watchmaker before the war. It is so crude. Look at this design. So few parts, so simple, like something from the last century. Our Lugers are modern weapons, precision instruments. This is just brute force. Weber had to agree. The Americans were known for their industrial power. They could build ships and tanks and airplanes faster than anyone else. But this pistol showed a different side of American thinking. It was not refined. It was not sophisticated. It was just big and heavy and loud, probably. Like everything else about America, he thought, raw power without finesse. They must think war is like their Wild West movies, Klaus said, pantomiming a quick draw. Cowboys and Indians. They do not understand modern warfare. We fight with precision, with discipline, with intelligent tactics. They want to just shoot bigger bullets and hope it works. The men laughed. It felt good to laugh. There was little enough to laugh about in the trenches. And mocking the Americans felt safe. They were new to this war. They had arrived only a year ago, fresh and confident and ignorant of what real fighting meant. Let them learn the hard way. Weber set the pistol down and looked toward the American lines, somewhere beyond the shattered trees and cratered earth. Reports had been coming in for days now. American Marines were massing for an attack. They were aggressive, reckless even. They attacked with unusual ferocity, pushing forward when more experienced troops would dig in and wait. Intelligence said these Marines had some romantic idea about courage and charging. They will learn. Everyone learns eventually. The war taught its lessons in blood. Sir, a runner approached, breathing hard. Patrol report. The Americans are moving through the wheat fields to our north. More than expected. They seem to be preparing for a major push. Weber nodded slowly. How long until they reach our positions? Could be tonight, could be dawn tomorrow. The captain looked at his men, then back at the captured American pistol sitting on the ammunition crate. So crude, so simple, so American. Make sure everyone has extra ammunition. Check the machine guns. If these Americans want to play cowboy, we will teach them what modern warfare really means. Night fell over Belleau Wood. In the darkness, men on both sides checked their weapons and waited. Weber held his Luger, its familiar weight comforting in his hand. Somewhere out there in the wheat fields, American Marines were moving forward, carrying those heavy, crude pistols. He almost felt sorry for them. Almost. But this was war, and sentiment had no place here. They would attack, and his men would cut them down with German precision and superior tactics. That was simply how it worked. He did not know yet that everything he believed was about to be tested by a pistol he had mocked just hours before. Dawn came to Belleau Wood like a hammer blow. The American artillery barrage started at 5 in the morning, shells screaming overhead and exploding in the German positions with earth-shaking force. Weber crouched in his bunker as dirt and concrete dust rained down from the ceiling. The bombardment lasted 30 minutes, then stopped. In the ringing silence that followed, he heard the whistles. The Americans were coming. Weber grabbed his Luger and rushed to the trench line. Through the morning mist and smoke, he could see them. Marines in their khaki uniforms moving through the wheat fields in waves. They did not advance carefully like experienced soldiers. They came forward fast, almost running, rifles held ready. Machine gun fire from Weber's position cut into them. Men fell, but others kept coming, always more coming. The fighting collapsed into chaos faster than Weber had ever seen. The Americans pushed through the first defensive line, pouring into the trenches. What had been organized defense became brutal close-quarters combat. Men struggled with rifles, knives, fists, anything they could use. The wheatfield battle turned into a savage brawl among the trees and shell craters of Belleau Wood itself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Weber fired his Luger at a Marine charging toward his position. The range was maybe 20 feet. He aimed center mass, just as he had been trained. He pulled the trigger twice. Both shots hit. He saw the impacts, saw the Marine stumble. But the man did not fall. The Marine kept coming, his face twisted with pain and rage and determination. Weber fired again, but his Luger jammed. Mud or blood or something had fouled the mechanism. He reached for his rifle, but there was no time. Then another American appeared, a young man with a Tennessee drawl who would later be identified as Private James Bourton. The Marine was wounded, blood soaking through his uniform on the left side. But he raised his pistol with steady hands. The Colt, that crude, heavy American pistol Weber had mocked yesterday. The range was 15 feet, close enough to see each other's eyes. Thornton fired once. Just once. The German soldier Weber had shot, the one who had kept charging despite 2 Luger rounds in his chest, dropped like someone had cut his strings. Not wounded, not knocked backward. Simply down, completely and instantly stopped. Dead before his body hit the mud. Weber stared in shock. He had never seen a pistol do that. Never seen a man just stop like that, as if his entire body had been switched off. The pattern repeated across the battlefield. In a shell crater 30 yards away, a German machine gunner took 3 9mm rounds from another soldier's Luger. He was hurt, bleeding, but he kept firing his weapon. Then an American corporal with a Colt 45 appeared at the crater's edge. One shot. The machine gunner collapsed over his gun, completely incapacitated. The fight was over in a second. Near a shattered oak tree, 2 German soldiers grappled with a Marine in hand-to-hand combat. They were winning. The Marine was smaller, younger. One of the Germans raised a trench knife for the killing blow. Another Marine, his face covered in mud and blood, fired his Colt from 10 feet away. The German with the knife went down hard and did not move. His companion tried to run. The Marine fired again. The second German fell mid-stride. Weber watched it happen again and again through the morning. German soldiers hit by Luger fire would stagger, would fall wounded, would sometimes keep fighting. But men hit by that American .45 caliber round just stopped. The difference was not subtle. It was shocking, absolute. The heavy bullet did not just wound. It delivered massive trauma to the body. Shock that shut down the nervous system. Damage so severe that fighting became impossible. By mid-morning, Weber's position was overrun. He found himself with his hands raised, surrounded by Marines who looked barely old enough to shave. They disarmed him efficiently, taking his Luger and his rifle. An American medic, a kid from Ohio with gentle hands, bandaged a cut on Weber's forehead that he had not even noticed. The medic worked on German wounded the same as American wounded, which surprised Weber more than it should have. They marched the prisoners back through the wheat fields. Weber walked past American dead and German dead lying together in the mud. He saw the wounds. The German casualties shot with .45 caliber rounds showed devastating damage. The bullets had not just penetrated, they had transferred enormous energy into tissue and bone. The temporary wound cavity was massive. A shot to the torso did not just pierce organs. It created hydrostatic shock that radiated through the body. A shot to an arm or leg did not just break bone. It shattered it, turning the limb useless instantly. At the American aid station, Weber overheard officers talking. One captain was examining a Colt pistol, checking it for damage. "These things are ugly as sin," the captain said, "but they work. We learned our lesson in the Philippines. Those Moro warriors would take 6 rounds from a .38 and keep coming with their knives. Men died because their pistols could not stop a fight. So we made this. Does not matter if it is pretty, Matters if it works when you need it. Another officer nodded. German Luger is a fine weapon, very accurate, very well made. But that 9mm round does not have enough mass. Our 45 is slower, sure, only 830 feet per second compared to their 1,000 plus. But our bullet weighs 230 grains compared to their 115. That is twice the weight. When it hits hard. Physics does not care about engineering elegance. Weber sat on the ground, his back against a tree, and thought about what he had witnessed. The Americans had not built a beautiful pistol. They had built a functional one. They had studied a problem, the problem of stopping dangerous men quickly, and they had engineered a solution. The Colt was too heavy, yes. It held fewer rounds than a Luger, only 7 in the magazine, plus 1 in the chamber. It was not as accurate a distance. But in close combat, in the desperate seconds where men killed or died, it was devastatingly effective. A German sergeant sat down next to Weber. His name was Friedrich, from Hamburg. He had been captured in the same battle. "Did you see what their pistols did?" Friedrich asked quietly. Weber nodded. "I saw. We laughed at them yesterday, called them crude, called them cowboy weapons." "I know, I was there." Friedrich was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that Weber would remember for the rest of his life. "Maybe we have been thinking about this war wrong. We keep trying to be better soldiers, better tacticians, better engineers. They just try to be better at ending fights, at finishing wars and going home. Maybe that is why they are winning." Weber looked at the Colt pistol on the American captain's hip. Heavy, blocky, unglamorous. But when it mattered, in the mud and blood and chaos, it had worked. It had worked perfectly. His Luger had jammed. Their Colts had kept firing. His 9mm had wounded. Their 45 had stopped fights instantly. Elegance had lost to effectiveness. The prisoner of war camp in Maryland was nothing like Weber expected. He had imagined cages and cruelty, the kind of treatment he had heard rumors about from other fronts. Instead, he found clean barracks, regular meals, and American guards who seemed almost bored with their duty. The camp sat in rolling farmland, surrounded by forests that reminded him painfully of home. Summer heat pressed down on the compound, thick and humid in a way that France had never been. Weber and 200 other German prisoners were assigned to work details. It was better than sitting idle, and the work gave structure to days that otherwise blended together in monotonous routine. In early July, Weber found himself assigned to a factory 15 miles from the camp. They loaded the prisoners onto trucks each morning and drove them through American countryside that seemed impossibly rich. Farms with fat cattle, barns painted bright red, towns where every house had glass windows, and people drove automobiles like they were nothing special. The factory produced weapons. Specifically, it produced the Colt Model 1911 pistol. Weber felt a strange twist in his stomach when he learned this. The weapon that had shocked him so badly at Belleau Wood was being built here in massive quantities by workers who looked like ordinary people, old men, women, even some younger men who had been rejected from military service for health reasons. They worked assembly lines that stretched the length of enormous buildings, filled with the smell of machine oil and hot metal. A supervisor named Patterson, a thick-necked man from Pennsylvania, took the German prisoners on a tour of the facility. He spoke slowly, assuming they did not understand English well. Some did, but Weber had studied English in school, and he understood most of what Patterson said. What he saw made him forget about the language barrier entirely. The factory floor was organized with ruthless efficiency. Each station performed one specific task. At the first station, workers shaped the frame from blocks of steel. At the next, they drilled holes for pins and screws. Further down the line, others fitted barrels, installed firing mechanisms, attached grips. The pistols moved along on conveyor belts, being assembled piece by workers who performed the same action hundreds of times per day. Weber watched a grandmother with gray hair install recoil springs. She did it in seconds, her hands moving with practiced ease, then reached for the next frame. Again and again and again. Patterson noticed Weber watching. "We make about 1,500 pistols a day in this facility," he said, not bothering to hide the pride in his voice. "We got 3 more factories just like this one. Every part is interchangeable. You can take pieces from 10 different guns, mix them up, and build a weapon that works perfectly. That is the American way. We do not make one perfect thing. We make a million good things." Weber did some quick math in his head. 1,500 per day, times 4 factories, times 6 days a week. The numbers were staggering. Germany's finest weapons works couldn't produce at a fraction of this speed. He thought about the Luger, each one carefully crafted, fitted by skilled gunsmiths. Beautiful, precise, and completely impossible to manufacture at this scale. After 2 weeks at the factory, Patterson pulled Weber aside. "You seem interested in how things work," the supervisor said. "You were an officer, right? Educated?" Weber nodded. Patterson handed him a Colt pistol, unloaded. "You can handle this. Look at it. Really look at it." Weber took the weapon, feeling that familiar heavy weight. But this time he examined it differently. He field-stripped it, taking it apart piece by piece. Patterson showed him how each component fit together. The design was brilliant in its simplicity. Fewer moving parts than a Luger. Wider tolerances, which meant it worked even when dirty or wet. The barrel locked to the slide with a tilting mechanism that was crude but incredibly reliable. Nothing delicate, nothing that would jam if a speck of mud got in the wrong place. "Your Luger is a finer weapon in some ways," Patterson admitted. "More accurate at distance, nicer to shoot. But this thing," he tapped the Colt, "this thing works when it matters. We designed it after the Philippines. Our boys were getting killed because their pistols would not stop men who wanted to kill them. So we made this. It is not pretty, but it puts a man down with one shot, every time." Weber reassembled the pistol, his hands moving slower than Patterson's, but getting the hang of it. He thought about below wood, about watching German soldiers drop like puppets with cut strings, about his Luger jamming at the worst possible moment, while American Colts kept firing through mud and blood and chaos. That night, back at the camp, Weber wrote in a small notebook he had been allowed to keep. The words came slowly at first, then faster. June 14, 1918. "I laughed at this pistol. We all did. We called it a brute's weapon, something for cowboys and savages. But I have seen what it does. I have watched it work when refined weapons failed. The Americans do not build what looks good on a parade ground. They build what works in hell. Our Luger is poetry. Their Colt is a sentence. Short, brutal, final. And in war, sentences win." The factory visits continued through July and into August. Weber learned about American industrial philosophy, though no one called it that. He learned about Frederick Taylor and his ideas about efficiency. He learned about assembly lines and interchangeable parts and mass production. Most importantly, he learned about a different way of thinking. German engineering pursued perfection, elegance, the single best solution crafted with skill and pride. American engineering pursued good enough, scaled up to overwhelming numbers, practical solutions that worked under the worst conditions. A German sergeant named Otto, who worked the factory line next to Weber, summed it up one evening. "They do not fight for glory," Otto said, staring at his calloused hands. "They fight to finish and go home. That is why they win. We want to be great warriors. They want the war to be over." In mid-August, the camp received newspapers reporting Germany's failing offenses, Allied advances, rumors of collapse. Weber read the reports and thought about pistols, about how the weapon you mock often teaches the hardest lessons, about how elegance means nothing if it doesn't work when needed. The Colt 45 had been designed to solve a specific problem, stopping dangerous men quickly, and it had solved that problem completely. His Luger had been designed to be a beautiful example of German engineering, and it was. But beauty does not win fights. Weber held the unloaded Colt that Patterson sometimes let him examine. He aimed at an imaginary target, feeling the weight, the balance. It was not a weapon he would have designed, but it was a weapon that worked. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The Americans understood something fundamental that Germany had missed. War was not about style or tradition or proving superiority. War was about solving the problem of the enemy as efficiently as possible, then going home. He wondered what else Germany had been wrong about. He wondered if they had lost this war not because they were weaker, but because they had been thinking about it all wrong from the start. The thought sat heavy in his chest, heavier than any pistol. The ship carrying Ernst Weber and 300 other German prisoners docked in Hamburg on a cold morning in February 1919. 4 months after the armistice, 4 months after Germany had surrendered, and the homeland Weber remembered existed only in his memory. The Hamburg that greeted him was a city of ghosts and rubble and starving people. The British blockade had continued even after the fighting stopped, and Germany was paying the price. Children with hollow eyes watched the prisoners disembark. Old women pushed carts looking for anything to burn for warmth. Buildings showed scars from riots and street fighting between communists and government forces. This was defeat, raw and ugly. Weber carried a small canvas bag with his few possessions. Inside, wrapped in a spare shirt, were his notebooks from the prisoner of war camp. Pages filled with sketches of factory layouts, notes on assembly line processes, drawings of the Colt pistol broken down into its component parts. He had also kept a photograph, technically contraband, that showed the Maryland factory floor with its rows of workers and conveyor belts stretching into the distance. An American guard had given it to him as a parting gift, understanding somehow that Weber needed to remember what he had seen. The walk from the docks to his family's apartment took 2 hours. Hamburg had no working streetcars. Fuel was scarce and expensive. Weber walked through streets he had known his whole life, now transformed into something alien. Shops were boarded up, garbage rotted in alleys. Men in threadbare uniforms, some missing arms or legs, begged on corners. The contrast hit him like a physical blow. He had spent 6 months in an American prisoner of war camp, eating regular meals, sleeping in a heated barracks, working in a factory that produced 1,500 pistols per day. He had returned to a nation that could barely feed its people. His mother answered the door on the 3rd knock. She looked 20 years older than when he had left for the war. Her face was thin, her clothes hung loose on a frame that had lost too much weight. But her eyes lit up when she saw him, and she pulled him into an embrace that felt desperate. His father sat in a chair by a cold fireplace, wrapped in blankets. The apartment was freezing. They couldn't afford coal. Over weak soup that evening, Weber's mother asked about America. His father said nothing, staring at the empty fireplace with eyes that had seen too much. Weber told them about the camp, about the factory, about assembly lines that produced weapons faster than German craftsmen could imagine. His mother listened with confusion. His father finally spoke, his voice rough. "They beat us with numbers, with factories. We had better soldiers, better training, better tactics, but they had more of everything. More men, more guns, more food, more steel. You cannot win against that." Weber thought about correcting him, about explaining that it was not just more, it was different. The Americans had thought about war differently. But his father looked too tired, too broken. So Weber just nodded and finished his soup. He found work 2 weeks later as an instructor at a technical school in Hamburg. They needed teachers, and his military experience and education made him qualified. The school was cold, underfunded, with broken windows and too few books. But it had students, young men who wanted to learn trades, to build something in a broken nation. Weber taught basic engineering, mechanical principles, manufacturing processes. After a month of teaching, Weber brought the Colt photographs and drawings to class. He displayed them alongside a Luger that one of the older instructors had kept from the war. The contrast was stark, even in pictures. "Look at these two pistols," Weber told his students, 20 young faces watching him with hungry attention. "The Luger is beautiful, it is precise, it represents the finest German engineering. Every part is carefully fitted, it is accurate and reliable under ideal conditions." He paused. "The Colt is ugly, it is heavy and crude. It has fewer parts, wider tolerances, simpler mechanisms. But in the mud of France, in the chaos of battle, the Colt worked and the Luger jammed. The Americans did not build a perfect weapon. They built a weapon that worked when it mattered most." One student, a thin boy named Hans who had lost his father in the war, raised his hand. "Are you saying German engineering is inferior?" Weber chose his words carefully. "I am saying we confused beauty with function. We built weapons that looked impressive, that worked perfectly on testing ranges. The Americans built weapons that worked in hell. That is the lesson. Effectiveness beats elegance. Solutions beat sophistication." The lessons evolved over months and years. Weber taught his students about American manufacturing, about interchangeable parts and assembly lines. He showed them how the Americans had taken ideas from many places, including Germany, and applied them without concern for tradition or pride. Just whatever worked. Some students embraced the ideas. Others grew resentful, angry that their teachers seemed to praise the enemy. Weber understood both reactions. By 1925, Weber had a reputation as an excellent but controversial instructor. He pushed his students to think practically, to solve problems rather than pursue perfection. Some went on to work in Germany's recovering industries. Others would later become engineers in a rebuilt German military machine, taking lessons about effectiveness and applying them in ways Weber never intended. In 1951, Weber was 65 years old and retired. His grandson, Klaus, named after the sergeant who had died at Belleau Wood, came to visit. The boy was 12, curious about everything. He found Weber's old notebooks in a drawer, the sketches of pistols and factories. "Grandfather, what are these?" Weber showed him the Colt drawings. He told the story carefully, edited for a child's understanding. About laughing at an ugly pistol, about watching it work when beautiful weapons failed, about learning in an enemy prison camp that sometimes the crude solution is the right solution. Klaus listened with wide eyes. "Did you hate them, the Americans?" Weber thought about Patterson, the factory supervisor who had treated prisoners with respect, about the medic at Belleau Wood who had bandaged German wounded, about guards who had shared cigarettes and talked about baseball, trying to explain the rules to confused German prisoners. "No," Weber said finally. "I learned from them. That is different." He pulled out the old photograph of the factory floor, faded now but still clear. "We laughed at their pistol. We called it ugly, brutal, excessive. But when it mattered, in the mud and blood and desperate seconds where men live or die, it worked. Always. Our Luger was a poem. Their Colt was a sentence. Short, brutal, final." He looked at his grandson. "I learned in an American prison camp what I should have learned in a German military academy. Wars are won by those who solve problems, not by those who make beautiful mistakes. That pistol dropped us with one shot, but the lesson took much longer to land." Klaus held the photograph carefully. "Is the lesson that Americans are better?" Weber shook his head. "The lesson is that we must never confuse what looks good with what works. Never dismiss what we do not understand. Never mock the crude solution until we have tested it against reality. That is what the Colt taught me. That is what I want you to remember." Years later, after Weber died, Klaus would keep those notebooks and photographs. He would remember his grandfather's words about effectiveness and humility and the danger of underestimating pragmatism. The Colt Model 1911 was still in production then, 70 years after its design, largely unchanged. It had not needed to change. It had been right from the start, in the way that mattered most. It worked when it had to. And sometimes that is the only beauty that matters. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.